Welcome to this presentation on TOSD. This module will introduce CRS reporters to the reporting on TOSST, Total Official Support for Sustainable Development. The objective of this module is to explain to CRS reporters how to report TOSST data. At the end of this presentation, you will be able to fill in the CRS TOSD template and to identify additional activities that are not ODA eligible but can be counted in TOSST. This module is divided into 3 sections. The first one will introduce you to the 3-step process to adjust your CRS template to a TOSST template. The second section focuses on how to expand the reporting system, and finally, the summary of key points. This section provides you an overview of a 3-step process to adjust your CRS template to a TOSST template. For CRS reporters, a specific mechanism is in place to limit the reporting burden and streamline reporting processes. CRS reporters can use the same Excel file for reporting CRS and TOSST. The reporting file contains 2 tabs, one for CRS and one for TOSST. There exists a pre-fill function. With the help of this function, formulas copy and transform automatically CRS data into raw TOSD data. Moreover, inputs by reporters are required. Reporters need to adjust, verify, and complement TOSST data. Using the combined TOSST CRS file is strongly recommended, as it simplifies the process for you as a reporter and for the Secretariat to validate the data. However, if you choose not to use this option, please empty the formulas in the TOSD tab or simply delete the tab and proceed with reporting on TOSST separately. Please also identify clearly in your new TOSST file the TOSD activities that are also reported in CRS by using the same identification number as in the CRS. It would also be important to identify additional TOSST activities by adding a comment in the notes field or add another tab. The provider should report TOSST data in 3 steps. The pre-filling function put in place in the Excel file is only a starting point for reporting on TOSST. The data needs thorough verification, adjustments, and complements. Reporters are kindly invited to provide these inputs as described in the following 3 steps. Please also refer to the explanatory notes document for more details. So the first step is to review the activities in the tab TOSST derived from CRS and remove non-sustainable activities. Afterwards, it is necessary to fill and check the TOSD specific fields. And the last step is to include additional TOSD activities not reported in the CRS. We will dive into each step in the upcoming slides. Information from the CRS will pre-fill many reporting items in TOSST. You can find a full list of concerned reporting items in the slide. For example, the reporting year, a project title, and amounts committed and disbursed will be pre-filled with CRS information. This slide gives you an overview of how specific formulas transform certain codes. The cooperation modality H02, H03, H04, and H05 in the CRS become the modality I01 in TOSST So this is about in-donor refugee costs. If an activity has a specified recipient code in CRS, the formulas will prefill Pillar 1 in TUSST. In case the activity has an unspecified recipient code or a cooperation modality such as E02, G01, H00, I01 or I02, the formula will prefill Pillar 2 in TUSST. The step 1 of the three-step process is to review the activities in tab TUSST derived from CRS and remove non-sustainable activities from TUSST. The assessment of sustainability is made on a case-by-case basis. There are a couple of contentious areas and activities that you can find on the slide. These are, for example, non-renewable or nuclear energy or petrochemical industry. TUST respondents mostly excluded related activities. In a few cases, these activities were included as they supported sustainable development in the specific country context. It is important to note that the TUST task force is currently discussing further operationalization of sustainability in TUSST. The step 2 of the three-step process is to fill and check the TUSST specific fields. These fields will be presented in the forthcoming slides. To an SDG target. A very important field in TUST reporting is the SDG focus, which is mandatory to fill in. This is because activities can only be reported in TUSST if they contribute to sustainable development. An activity is deemed to support sustainable development if it directly contributes to at least one of the SDG targets, and if no substantial detrimental effect is anticipated on one or more of the other targets. There may be cases where reporters cannot find a direct link with one of the SDG targets. This is due to the fact that SDG targets represent a global ambition and may therefore not encapsulate all dimensions of a given developmental issue in their final agreed wording. If you cannot find a direct link to a target, you can still report it against a goal and provide an appropriate justification in the SDG level explanation field. Please report the values separated by a semicolon. In case no direct link can be found to an SDG target, report the goal as, for example, 2.0 for goal 2. We recommend to limit the SDGs to 10 targets goals. The cooperation modality in the CRS becomes the modality in TUSST. For this, specific modalities exist in TUSST to mark activities related to the support to refugees. Providers can report the support to refugees and protected persons from TUST-eligible countries in the provider country, up to 12 months of their stay under the modality I01. TUST activities reported to the CRS under cooperation modality H02, H03, H04, and H05 were transformed to TUST modality I01. They should also attach the Pillar 2 to related activities. Modality I02 will be covered in Step 3, as it is not ODA eligible, and therefore additional TUSST data is required. Modality I03 captures the support to refugees and protected persons in other countries of asylum that are TUST-eligible countries. Related activities are reportable in Pillar 1. In the CRS, similar activities are likely assigned to purpose codes 720.10, 720.40, and the modality C01. If the activity fits, reporters should change the modality to I03 in TUST. Providers can report support to refugees, protected persons, voluntarily returning to their countries of origin, nationality, or last habitual residence if it is a TOSTI eligible country. Pre-departure assistance is excluded here, as support to pre-departure assistance can be included in modalities I-01, I-02, or I-03. Death support is reportable in Pillar 1. Modality I-05, support to refugees, protected persons, migrants in the provider country for their integration, will be covered in Step 3 because it is not ODA eligible. Modality H00 now captures expenditures in the provider country not included elsewhere. This includes expenditures in provider countries other than refugee costs, scholarships, and imputed student costs and administrative costs. This is an important modality in TOSSD Pillar 2, which notably aims at showing what providers do within their borders to support sustainable development, for example, research and development. Please be aware that this modality does not exist in the CRS. Therefore, in Step 2, it is important to record relevant CRS activities as H00. There are a few examples of activities that could be included in modality H00. These include domestic research and development activities, farmer-to-farmer meetings on climate-smart solutions across borders, and contributions to WWF Norge, which is an international rescue mission for the world oceans. Choosing the right channel code and cooperation modality, core or earmarked contributions, is very important, especially when the provider extends the funding to trust funds managed by multilateral organizations. In TOSTI, multilateral organizations are considered as providers and report all activities they implement, regardless of whether they are funded with core or earmarked funding. The Secretariat and not reporters will remove contributions channeled to through multilateral organizations for all multilateral organizations that report on their outflows in TOSTI to avoid double counting. In TOSTI, reporters can provide information on financial instruments of their reported activities. Please note that in the CRS, this information is captured under the type of finance. The available CRS information will therefore pre-fill this TOSTI reporting item. In TOSTI, there exists a specific financial instrument for direct provider spending. The code for this type of financial instrument is 2100. It includes government expenditures incurred through direct spending channels other than grants. This includes, for example, government budget allocations for research and development carried out by government personnel in government facilities or hosting by the government of an international workshop conference on sustainable development. In TOSTI, there also exists another specific financial instrument that captures subsidies and similar transfers. This financial instrument can be reported with the code 3100. It covers subsidies and social benefits to households as defined in the system of national accounts. Subsidies are unrequited payments that government units make to enterprises on the basis, for example, of the levels of their production activities. Subsidies prohibited by the WTO are not reportable in TOSSD. Social benefits to households are current transfers received by households that are intended to provide for the needs that arise from certain events or circumstances, for example, housing. Subsidies and similar transfers can be used by governments to promote sustainable development objectives, for example, by supporting research activities carried out by pharmaceutical firms or efforts by households to improve the energy efficiency of their housing. In TOSST, there is also a reporting item for financing arrangements. The financing arrangement identifies specific characteristics of a financial arrangement. For example, blended finance, Islamic finance, export credits, co-financing arrangement involving recipient counterpart funds. A very important reporting item in TOSST is the TOSD pillar, which we will explain in section 2. In TOSD, you should also report on the framework of collaboration. It describes the broad type of partnership under which the activity is carried out. In TOSD, these are South-South cooperation or triangular cooperation. Triangular cooperation involves a partnership among three partners. First, a beneficiary partner that requests support to tackle a specific development challenge. The second is the pivotal partner that has proven experience in tackling the issue and shares its resources, knowledge, and expertise to help others do the same. The third partner is the facilitating partner that helps connect the partners, supporting the collaboration financially and technically. The pivotal and facilitating partners each report on the resources they provide. If you provide in-kind technical cooperation, you can also report this in TOSST. The TOSD task force has designed a specific methodology to value in-kind technical cooperation, which is defined as technical cooperation implemented using public officials of a reporting country. The main objective is to estimate expenditures in an internationally comparable manner. If a reporting country hires experts in the market to deploy a technical cooperation program, then the price of a contract is considered internationally comparable and does not require a specific methodology. The specific methodology uses the purchasing power parity factor. The PPP methodology is widely used in economic and development studies by multilateral institutions and other actors and is technically easy to implement. The PPP methodology is used by a number of potential TOSD reporters to specifically measure the opportunity cost of their in-kind technical cooperation. Please note that it is possible to change this methodology if southern providers agree on another one. If you report loans, you will also need to provide information on the concessionality of a loan. There exists a binary yes or no code indicating the concessionality of a loan according to the IMF definition. On the slides, you can find a link to an IMF calculator for assessing the grant elements. You can also provide information on the maturity. This is the interval, or in other words, number of months, from commitment date to the date of the last payment of amortization. If you report private finance mobilized, you can also indicate the leveraging mechanism by using the unique code indicating the leveraging instrument used. Please refer to the reporting instructions, Annex F, for more information on the methodologies for reporting on resources mobilized. Moreover, there exists multiple codes that identify the origin of the funds mobilized. And finally, the item co-financiers is a free text field specifying the names of private and public co-financiers. In the next slides, we will go a little bit deeper in the reporting of private finance mobilized. So in TOSD, reporters can provide information on private finance mobilized. In the TOSD context, private finance mobilization refers to the stimulation by specific official financial mechanisms or interventions, for example, guarantees, of additional private resource flows for sustainable development which would not have been invested otherwise. This is the concept of causality. The measure covers all private finance mobilized by official development finance interventions, regardless of the origin of a private fund. The origin can be in the provider country, the recipient country, or a third country. This slide presents an illustration of a project in the area of private finance mobilized. The Belgrade Waste-to-Energy project involves the creation of a public-private partnership aimed to remediate a landfill and construct a waste-to-energy facility. The vehicle is financed by private equity providers guaranteed by the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, and debt packages which mobilized private lenders through two syndications arranged by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, and the International Finance Corporation, IFC, with participation from bilateral providers, for example, the Development Bank of Austria. In international statistics on private finance mobilization, it is key to avoid double counting when multiple official providers co-invest in a single project, such as the project we have just seen. Instrument-specific methodologies have been developed for providers to report only their attributed share of the amounts mobilized. For validation purposes, reporting on supplementary data at the project level is requested in a tab called Mobilization. If you would like to report private finance mobilized, you should use the TOSDI core data fields, amounts mobilized from the private sector, leveraging mechanism, and role or position and origin of the funds mobilized. Moreover, there are fields for all instruments as well as instrument-specific fields that you can see on the right picture. If you require any assistance in reporting on this, please reach out to the Secretariat. Let's have a look now at how you would report the private finance mobilized in our example of the Belgrade Waste-to-Energy project. As a reminder, the vehicle is financed by private equity providers, guaranteed by MIGA, and debt packages, which mobilized private lenders through two syndications arranged by EBRD and IFC, with participation from bilateral providers, in our example, OEB. Shown before, providers would use a TOSDI reporting form to report private finance mobilized. These are examples of private finance mobilized reported by MIGA, EBRD, and Austria, OEB. Each row shows how each provider reported the amounts that they have mobilized. In principle, all TOSDI data should be reported and will be fully disclosed at the activity level. However, some TOSDI data could potentially include confidential or sensitive information, in which case data providers are advised to filter out upstream pieces of information deemed confidential or sensitive. For example, client names, maturity, etc. If not considered sufficient, data providers are invited to reach out to the Secretariat to explore potential solutions to address confidentiality restrictions. This table shows an example of how you could filter out sensitive data. Instead of mentioning the bank that would be supported, you could simply refer to the kind of institution. In this example, it would be local finance institutions. At the same time, you can simply delete information on maturity. Now we will look at a number of contributions that have a specific treatment in QSST. So on one hand, the secretariats and note reporters will remove the capitalization of private sector instrument vehicles. In TOSDI, only the outflows from PSI vehicles are reflected. On the other hand, the Secretariat will also remove contributions channeled to or through multilateral organizations for all multilateral organizations that report on their outflows in TOSDI to avoid double counting in the recipient perspective. This section will give you inputs for the final step in the three-step reporting process to adjust your CRS template to a TOSDI template. As a last step, providers can include additional TOSDI activities that are not reported in the CRS. Additional activities can be found in the following areas for which specific eligibility criteria were developed. These areas are research and development, peace and security, climate change, and refugees and protected persons. Officially supported export credits and contributions to multilateral institutions can also be added based on the reporting instructions. Activities can also be reported based on current eligibility criteria in the areas of biodiversity, health, satellite and observation systems, culture, trade, industry, sustainable consumption and production, or human rights and justice. Reporters can find additional guidance on the eligibility of research and development, peace and security, climate change and refugees, protected persons in Annex E of the reporting instructions. The task force developed in particular detailed eligibility criteria to operationalize the concept of international public goods in the area of research and development. These criteria are notably based on the notions of transnational benefits, open access to scientific publications and research data, and access to innovations in developing countries. The criteria are the following. First, the research subject is SDG related and potentially applicable to more than one country, including at least one TOSDI eligible country, or the research subject is related to basic research. Second, in the case of research and development projects aimed at generating new knowledge, the project is eligible if a public access policy of research funder or the research performer is based on the principle of open access to scientific publications and research data. Third, in the case of research and development projects aimed at developing new products or technologies, the project is eligible if the results of the research and development are expected to be put in the public domain, or if a research and development project is aimed at developing a product or technology that is accessible to populations in TOSDI eligible countries. For example, through non-exclusive licensing, upfront agreement on pricing, differential pricing policies for developing countries, advanced market commitments. This slide presents types of activities that can be included in QSSD in the area of research and development, and also concrete examples. Providers can report activities taking place in the provider country, such as the financing of research primarily aimed at generating new knowledge, for example, academic research, provided a research funder or a research performer apply the principle of open access to scientific publications and research data. Examples that support SDG 3 are basic research aimed at understanding the mechanisms of immunology, or the clinical research in physiology aimed at understanding biological mechanisms. There are also examples for SDG 13 or 14. The project quantifying the impact of the urban biosphere on the net flux of CO2 from cities into the atmosphere supports SDG 13. You can find a link to this project on the slide. The project measuring acidification in the Arctic Ocean supports SDG 14, for which you can also find the link on the slide. Another type of activity in the provider country would be the financing of research primarily aimed at developing new products and technologies. The project's open source toolbox for modeling integrated energy systems is an activity with which research and development is expected to be put in the public domain. It also supports SDG 7. In addition, a research and development project that would be eligible in TUSSD would be a project that is aimed at developing a product or technology that is accessible to populations in TOSD eligible countries. This access could be ensured, for example, through affordable pricing. An example would be the project Effective and Affordable Flu Vaccines in the World that supports SDG 3. Another possibility to ensure access is through cooperation with research institutions from developing countries. An example is the project Breeding Forage and Grain Legumes to increase EU's and China's protein self-sufficiency that supports SDG 2. Next to activities taking place in the provider countries, providers can also report global and regional activities. This slide presents a few examples. The first example is the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases. That is an alliance of major research funding agencies to specifically address chronic non-communicable diseases on a global scale. The associate members of this alliance include both advanced and developing countries. The following example is the Human Frontier Science Program, which promotes international collaboration in basic research focused on life sciences. The membership of this program includes also both advanced and developing countries, such as India. The last example is the European and developing countries clinical trials partnership. It is a public-public partnership between countries in Europe and sub-Saharan Africa aimed at accelerating the clinical development of new or improved medicinal products for the identification, treatment, and prevention of poverty-related infectious diseases, including re-emerging diseases. This slide now includes more examples of global and regional activities. The first example is about the Ocean Energy Systems Technology Collaboration Program. It is an intergovernmental research collaboration between countries that includes many advanced and developing countries. The second example is research on understanding nuclear weapons risks by the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. The third example is the OECD Center for Educational Research and Innovation, whose membership includes several TOSD eligible countries. In addition, this center provides international comparative research that studies a number of other developing countries. Providers can also report additional activities in the area of peace and security. This encompasses, for example, peacekeeping operations, cyber security, or international tribunals. This slide presents examples of global and regional activities as well as activities taking place in the provider country or non-TOSD eligible countries. Global and regional activities would be, for example, the deployment of civilian experts to international peace operations or contributions to the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. Examples of activities taking place in the provider country or non-TOSD eligible countries are research on security policy, disarmament and non-proliferation through Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or supporting the research on Iran sanctions of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. More examples of activities in TOSD-eligible countries include police cooperation on counter-narcotics or activities supporting the elimination of biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons. Providers could find additional TOSD data, for example, at the Ministry of Interior, on international police cooperation, or the Ministry of Defense for other security cooperation. Providers can also report additional TOSD activities in the area of climate change. The TOSD Task Force has developed specific eligibility criteria for the reporting on related activities. You can find these criteria in the Annex E of the reporting instructions. Cross-border resource flows related to mitigation and adaptation activities in TOSD-eligible countries are reportable in Pillar 1. Climate actions that convey transnational benefits at global or regional levels are included in Pillar 2. Activities carried out by multilateral institutions are eligible, regardless of whether the institution has combating climate change as its main objective or one of its objectives. Moreover, climate actions in the provider country or in a non-TOSD eligible country and that convey transnational benefits are also eligible in TOSSD. This includes, in particular, research and knowledge creation on climate change mitigation and adaptation, which is eligible if it complies with TOSD eligibility criteria for research and development in general, which aim to ensure that results of the research are available for populations and scientists worldwide. It also includes protection and/or enhancement of greenhouse gas, sinks and reservoirs, and activities that limit anthropogenic emissions of GHGs. It is important to note that climate adaptation actions taking place in the provider country or in a non-TOSD eligible country are generally excluded from TOSSD, given that adaptation is essentially a localized activity. If adaptation activities can be demonstrated to produce substantial benefits to TOSD eligible countries, they can be included in TOSSD. Activities in the provider country or non-TOSD eligible countries are, for example, activities related to climate mitigation. This would be, for example, reforestation and sinks or carbon capture and storage. Moreover, providers can report climate research if it follows the general research and development guidelines. This could be research on the Southern Ocean carbon and heat impact on climate. Global and regional activities are, for example, supports of global climate observing systems or international events and workshops. Providers could find additional TOSD data at the Ministry of the Environment or Research. Providers can also include additional activities in the area of refugees and protected persons. This encompasses the temporary sustenance of refugees in the provider country beyond the 12-month period, as well as expenditures for the integration of refugees and migrants in the provider country up to the first 5 years of their stay. In the area of refugees and protected persons, providers can also report global and regional activities as well as activities in the provider countries. An example for global and regional activities are activities from UNHCR funded through earmarked contributions. Activities in the provider country are, for example, temporary sustenance, such as food and shelter, or integration in the economy and culture of a provider country, such as language training. Providers can also report activities in TOSTI-eligible countries. These include, for example, humanitarian assistance to refugees, for which there exists additional information, as these are separately identified in TUSSD through a cooperation modality, which is not the case in the CRS. Another example is supporting complementary pathways that enable displacement-affected populations to successfully access livelihoods towards a durable solution through skills building and linking refugees to international employment opportunities in third countries. Providers could find additional TOSTI data, for example, at the Ministry of Social Affairs, that might have data on social protection. Another possibility to gather more data might also to reach out to the Ministry of Interior for the registration of refugees, protected persons, the Ministry of Labour for data on employment programs, or finally the Ministry of Education for data on school costs for refugees. Providers can include additional TOSTI activities in the area of officially supported export credits. The scope of this area are export credits when extended in association with development finance or explicitly designed to contribute to sustainable development. Types of activities that can be included are officially supported export credits extended by government-owned or controlled specialized export financing agencies or institutions, export credit agencies, ECAs, for commercial purposes to finance a specific purchase of goods or services, for example, purchase of fire truck, solar plant construction. They can take the form of, first of all, official direct export credits, i.e. loans extended by export credit agencies to facilitate exports to developing countries. Second, they can take the form of officially guaranteed insured export credits, i.e. loans extended by the private sector but guaranteed or insured by export credit agencies to finance an export transaction. Providers could possibly find additional data at the official export credit agency of the Ministry of Finance. Providers can also include additional TOSTI data on their contributions to multilateral institutions that have a global mandate and contribute to international public goods. For example, they could report standard-setting activities or contributions to the International Monetary Fund or to the World Trade Organization. It is important to note the treatment of contributions through multilateral organizations in TOSTI. All CRS activities channeled through multilateral organizations, bilateral and multilateral ODA, i.e. transactions assigned modality P02 and or a multilateral channel code, are copied in the TOSTI tab by default. In the TOSTI system, multilateral providers will be invited to report on all activities they implement. However, these data are to be included by bilateral providers in their TOSTI reporting to inform the Secretariat about the relevant multilateral organizations to approach for collecting TOSTI data. As and when a multilateral institution has provided the data, the inflows contributed by bilateral providers to that institution will no longer be reflected in TOSTI. For example, TOSD reporting will be sought from specific trust funds. Upon inclusion of their outflows data in TOSD, the corresponding inflow data in providers reporting B03 type of contributions will be removed from the TOSD recipient perspective. Contributions by bilateral providers to multilateral institutions will be used to build a provider perspective in TOSD in future. This section presents how to expand a reporting system to include TOSD reporting. This graph shows an overview of a typical TOSD reporting system. Normally, you would have a central reporting agency that is in the middle of the reporting system. It fulfills multiple tasks. Aid agencies and other government institutions report data to the central reporting agency that then would verify, correct, and store data. The central agency also publishes the data by using different communication tools such as annual reports. Moreover, it also stores the data in a statistical database. Finally, it validates data for TOSD reporting and stands in close contact with the Secretariat during this process. It is important to note that not every provider has or should put in place the same reporting system. This overview should only provide you with some insights into and guidance on how such reporting systems are usually built. Providers can build a TOSD reporting system in 7 steps. This and the next slide will represent a roadmap that will be explained more in detail in the subsequent slides. Here, I would just like to point out the different steps. The first 4 steps are mobilization, preparation, implementation, and collection, reporting, and review. The final steps are data publication, data dissemination and policy discussions, and feedback and learning. In the first step, mobilization, it is important to get high-level support for reporting to TOSD. To achieve this, you should present, first of all, a roadmap, such as the one presented in the previous slides. Second, you should also present your strategic objectives. That could be, for example, political objectives, such as implementing political commitments from the G20 on the promotion of TOSD. Other objectives could be to provide transparency and accountability towards citizens, or to promote your country as a leader in sustainable development. You could also present a budget with adequate resources that will be needed to finance the position of a TOSD focal point in the central reporting entity. These resources should also be sufficient to set up an appropriate IT system and for coordination of the various representatives of the reporting entities, for example, organization of meetings, trainings, workshops. Moreover, you can present a legal and/or administrative instrument to structure and implement the reporting. For example, a modification of law or government regulation. At the end of a step, relevant senior officials should confirm their willingness to collect and publish TOSD information. In the second step, you can do a mapping of the necessary datasets or areas where data should be collected and the relevant reporting entities where this data can be found. You can also confirm that you will use the same IT system as for your CRS reporting. In step 3, you can set up the TOSD team in the central and relevant reporting entities. Focal points should be formally assigned to the TOSD tasks, part-time work, in their respective reporting entities. Statistical teams should get a clear mandate to compile and validate TOSD reporting. The independence of a central reporting entity should be ensured. You can also train all focal points in TOSD. This includes the reporting instructions, the TOSD form, and the explanatory notes. Moreover, you could also set up an internal process for regularly updating senior management on progress made in collecting and reporting TOSTI data. The fourth step is collection, reporting, and review. The process to collect TOSTI data is similar to the CRS data collection process. In practice, a central reporting entity should first of all collect data from the relevant reporting entities. Second, it should carry out the necessary quality control. For this, the central reporting agency should send the file back to the TOSTI Task Force Secretariat for review. Moreover, it is important to note that the TOSTI Task Force Secretariat verifies the conformity of the data with the TOSTI reporting instructions and provides feedback on the data to the focal points. You should also stick to the main principles during this phase. First, you should send the data according to the deadlines. Second, be prepared to coordinate with entities to respond in time to the Secretariat's commands and changes to the reporting file. Third, be aware that you are ultimately responsible for your file, so the TOSTI Task Force Secretariat will always check changes with you. In step 5, data are published on TOSTI Online and therefore are publicly available. You should be prepared to respond to questions from various stakeholders that will look at this data. This includes citizens, journalists, academics, think tanks, civil society organizations, government institutions, etc. Do not hesitate to use the TOSTI data visualization tool that you can reach via TOSTI Online and get back to the Secretariat for questions and feedback. Step 6 is about data dissemination and policy discussions. First of all, you should communicate at the country level on your data and how staff, CSOs, academics can use this data. Your communication should focus on responding to your strategic objectives, as outlined in Step 1 on mobilization. You can also consider producing an annual Sustainable Development Report and/or using social media for dissemination. Second, you can organize relevant events and policy discussions on, for example, thematic and sectoral analysis such as COVID-19 or peace and security. Step 7 is about feedback and learning. You can implement changes in your Sustainable Development Cooperation policies based on TOSTI policy discussions. Moreover, you can investigate the possibility of expanding the scope of your reporting for the following year. In Pillar 1, you could report new financial instruments such as equities to developing countries or export credits. In Pillar 2, you could report data from new institutions such as the Ministry of Research or Ministry of Defense. In addition, you could apply your lessons learned on how to improve the data collection, reporting, and review process. Lastly, you can train newcomers and avoid staff turnover, particularly in the central reporting entity. You could anticipate staff turnover in the various reporting entities and ensure that newcomers are properly trained ahead of a data collection exercise. I would like to raise your attention to the recommendations from the peer reviews on development finance statistics. First, statistical teams need a clear mandate to validate development finance statistics. Statistical teams also need to be authorized and able to adjust the reporting by the different government departments. Second, coordination and communication in data collection are key. A centralized database to facilitate production of statistics is recommended. Moreover, it is important to communicate with local governments and raise awareness about the relevance of data and explain how they are used. Third, countries need to make sure that the data are fit for purpose. They could, for example, make use of data visualization tools. Lastly, members could communicate and disseminate their data more strategically. Members could make links to data portals from press releases about the announcement of new projects financed by the country. Members could also use social media. This section presents a summary of key points of this module. First, all documents for TOSTI reporters can be found on www.tosti.org. Second, CRS reporters can streamline their CRS and TOSTI reporting to get raw TOSTI data. Formula will transform CRS into TOSTI codes. Reporters need to verify, adjust, and complement this initial data. Third, TOSTI reporting follows a three-step process. In the first step, CRS reporters review the activities in tab TOSTI derived from CRS and remove non-sustainable activities from TOSTI. In the second step, CRS reporters fill and check the TOSTI-specific fields. In the third and last step, CRS reporters include additional TOSTI activities not reported in the CRS. The TOSTI Task Force Secretariat stands ready to support reporting countries in their reporting efforts. Thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to reach out to the TOSTI Task Force Secretariat, and good luck with your reporting on TOSTI.